Welcome, everybody. This is Julian from SFS. Today, I have an interesting podcast for y'all. We sit down with Taylor from Australia. And Taylor is focusing on studying fertility boosting herbal supplements and if they are, in fact, effective in boosting fertility. So we talk a lot about that, and we also dig into other herbal supplements and ancient medicines that have been around for years and the scientific basis behind them. So I hope you enjoy the episode, and please give it a listen. Welcome, everybody. This is Julian from Straight From a Scientist. Today I have a very special guest, Taylor Catherine, all the way from Australia. How are you doing today, Taylor Catherine?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So
Good.
you work in herbal medicines, specifically in the reproduction and fertility field.
Fertility? Yeah, I
Yes.
do.
Tell me a little bit about that. How did you get into that field?
Sure. Totally by accident. I just kind of fell into it. Um, I don't think anyone really starts there or like dreams from a childhood of working with sperm, but people fall into it.
It happens. It
Um,
happens.
yeah, I'm not sure what I assume it's in the US, you usually do a master's before you do a PhD. So usually in Australia, you would do honors rather than masters, which is basically a fourth year of after you finish your undergrad and you do a thesis. So it's a year-long research project. And then that basically determines whether or not you would get accepted into a PhD. So for that, I had a different project kind of pretty much lined up, which fell through at the last minute. And then I was like, oh gosh, what do I do? I've only got a few weeks to figure something else out. And I was studying pharmacology at the time in my final semester, and the woman who did the reproductive pharmacology lectures, she had kind of mentioned if anyone was looking for honors or PhD projects that she could to contact her. So I emailed her and I was like, can you please take me on? I'm kind of in a pickle. And she's like, yeah, like let's do something. She's like, oh, like there's a few different things we could do, but I'm quite interested in, obviously there's a lot of what's the word? So herbal medicine is kind of a buzzword. It's kind of a trend, especially when it comes to fertility. If you walk into the health store, you're going to see a bunch of fertility boosting supplements and mixtures of herbs that promote fertility, promote hormones and that kind of thing. So we were quite interested in seeing, like testing some of them, seeing what they do. So I did that for my honors year. I looked at ginseng. So basically I think I had 8 rams. So I used sheep in my research. I had 8 rams. Half of them got fed ginseng every day for 3 months. And we looked at their blood and their sperm weekly throughout that 3 months to see any kind of effect that it was having. There was no effect.
No effect at all. Okay.
No effect, but we did run into some problems with ruminant metabolism versus like human metabolism. So we weren't sure if the ginseng was just not making it past the rumen, which is one of the stomachs that sheep has, if for anyone who doesn't know how sheep work.
Okay.
So they've obviously got 4 stomachs, so it's a little bit different in the metabolism. So I'm like, oh, maybe it's not even getting into the bloodstream. Maybe it's not reaching their sperm, or maybe it is and it's just not doing anything. So there was a lot of variables that kind of came up that we hadn't really put a great deal of thought into. So the results were exceptionally underwhelming.
Yeah, that's unfortunate,
And
but it
then,
happens.
it happens, but I still was like, oh, I kind of do want to get to the bottom of this. Let's continue this for my PhD. Because I'm very, as any of my friends or family will tell you, I'm very not against herbal medicine and not against anything like that, but against anything that doesn't have evidence to back it up.
As you should
And
be, as you
obviously,
should be. There's a
yeah,
lot of
as a
misinformation.
scientist,
Yeah, exactly.
there's so much misinformation, especially in Australia. It's quite, there's almost a movement of rejecting science and rejecting evidence and rejecting medicine in favor of Reiki and naturopathy and homeopathy and herbal supplements, which just blows my mind. But then I figure if I'm going to preach this to people and tell them to not take these things, I should probably be like, well, I've done some research and they don't work, or they do work, or
Exactly. You've seen it
or
with your own
something.
eyes, and you've done a controlled study. Now,
Yeah, and there's just not
yeah,
a lot of, as I was saying to you earlier, there's a wealth of literature on things like ginseng, but when you read these studies and they're not very compelling, the data is not very robust, the studies are not very robust, the methods are very questionable. So people say, oh, but there's all this evidence that ginseng increases sperm motility or something, and then for every 10 papers that say that it does, there's 20 papers that says it doesn't,
yeah.
and the quality of the research is just not good. So I thought, why not, add to that wealth of literature that's already out there, and hopefully with some better controlled studies on what actually is happening.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, ginseng is originally from China, right? And it's been used for thousands of years, I believe, or who knows?
Yes.
Not, I don't know
So
how many
there's
years, but
thousands. Yeah. So there's a
thousands.
few different
Different types of ginseng.
a different like species or subspecies, I guess you'd call them. There's Korean ginseng. There's like Korean red ginseng, white ginseng, all these different types. They're quite similar. And what we do know is that they are very pharmacologically active plants. No one's saying they don't do anything. They do a lot, but that's not always a good thing. Because if you pretty much type ginseng into a database, you'll see studies about their effects on sperm, their effects on estrogen, effects on testosterone, effects on acetylcholine, anything you can think of. Ginseng probably has some kind of effect on that, and that's not always obviously a good thing. If you want to increase testosterone, you don't necessarily want to increase acetylcholine as well.
Exactly.
And that lack of selectivity can be quite problematic.
So it's very
So
general.
no one is saying that these herbs don't do anything. We know they do something. We know they do a lot. It's just whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is really the question that we need to ask.
Now, are there any proven effects of ginseng? For example, I've taken ginseng for kind of as a stimulant before to give me some more energy. And I have noticed, a marginally larger amount of energy and before exercising, for example, or something like that. But it could be a placebo effect. So who knows?
Could be. Never underestimate the placebo effect. There's definitely some concrete evidence about the effects of ginseng on things like steroid hormone receptors. So both estrogen, testosterone. It's just the extent to what they do and how they do it that we're not quite clear about. So we know that ginseng affects these energy-wise. I'd probably have to look back into the literature reviews that I've done on this, which I haven't opened in a while. I can imagine it would have some kind of effect on energy. I'm not exactly sure in what way. Again, there's probably an aspect of placebo there as well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And also whatever else is in the ginseng capsules that you're taking. But you do see it added to things like soft drinks. You can even get it with alcoholic drinks here. I'm not sure if you can.
Whoa, yeah, we don't have that in the US.
Yeah, sometimes. I forget. So things like Red Bull, there's similar energy drinks, and some of them contain ginseng. So someone somewhere clearly thinks it's effective in boosting energy.
Interesting.
So there's definite evidence that it affects hormones and things like that. It's just the extent to which that happens.
Okay, so
we're not quite clear about.
So we're not clear. What you found was that's inconclusive as far as what am I trying to say? As far as affecting sperm count and sperm motility.
Yes.
And you're
It also seems to be species dependent. So a lot of these studies have been done in rats. And yeah, that's obviously translational to humans and other species, but yeah, also dependent on a bunch of other things as well.
now, why could you do it in a population of humans, or what would be the difficulties in doing it in a subpopulation of humans? For example, students at your university, or
Yeah, you could do. There have been a lot of human studies. Um, a lot of them are concentrating on the effects of things like sexual performance and things like that, rather than something that you can really quantify, like sperm motility.
but
So
sexual
obviously,
performance is quite subjective.
exactly, they're usually
Yeah.
self-reporting studies. So the guy's like, "Yeah, I felt great," or "Yeah, and I didn't really do anything," or anything, and then they formulate that into a study that says,
Yeah.
"Yeah, it makes you feel
Sounds
great."
pretty weak to
So
me.
yeah,
Yeah.
so ginseng traditionally was used as an aphrodisiac, which is, well, yeah, that's the what's the word? So yeah, for thousands of years, it's believed to be an aphrodisiac, increased libido, that kind of thing. So yeah, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the human studies are self-reporting, quite subjective, not very robust. Yeah, I could probably get a bunch of students at my university to do that. That would probably be a
It
bit
would be
weird.
kind of weird
Um,
trying to recruit subjects,
yeah.
right?
Um,
Yeah, would you
the
mind
other
coming
thing,
into my office
yeah.
for? Yeah.
After, can I see you after class?
Yeah,
Because yeah,
exactly.
I teach
I
half
need
of
you
them, so that
to,
would be weird.
yeah, get me some. Anyway, we don't have
Yes,
to get into
I do remember.
that.
I do remember my supervisor suggesting that we could contact the local football team and ask them if they're willing to participate. But I was like, let's stick to an animal model for now.
I think the
Um,
benefit to having a human model obviously would be kind of awkward and strange for the first couple subjects, and then you would probably get used to it. But the benefit is being, close to the source. You're using humans, which is what you're trying to understand. But I guess the
yeah,
downside, like you said before the podcast, was that you can't control the variables like you can in your sheep population.
exactly. So when you're using an animal model, you can control for pretty much everything. So I use sheep. So currently in my PhD research, I'm doing in vitro stuff. So I'm pretty much having the sperm in vitro and whacking some ginseng or turmeric or whatever in with them, and then we can talk about this later, but then going and using flow cytometry to have a look at what's going on in the cells. But whether it's in vitro or in vivo, if you're using something like, yeah, so for example, I'm using sheep, and you can control for all these other variables. So all my sheep I use are the same age, they're all the same breed, they all live in the same environment, they're all in the same, they're on campus in the same, they live in the same field with their friends, they get fed the same thing.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
obviously, sheep don't smoke, sheep don't take drugs, sheep don't drink alcohol, sheep don't eat fatty food all the time, and all these kind of things can obviously influence everything about them, but especially things like fertility. So obviously it's a bit harder to control for that in 20 something university students if they
Yeah, who
have
are out
drunk alcohol that
partying.
weekend and
Exactly.
those kind of things. So yeah, and it's also quite easy to get sperm from a sheep. You train them and they're very quick to train, and then they do their thing, and you can get as many samples as you need, basically. We
Mm-hmm.
don't need to go into that.
Yeah, we don't have to go into the nitty gritty. Very interesting. Yeah, I think there are definitely benefits to using sheep as an experimental model.
Mm.
Now, I want to let's talk into a little bit about more of the methods. You said flow. What was that?
So flow cytometry,
Flow
yeah.
cytometry. Okay, explain
So
that for
I'm
the layman.
Oh, well, I'm pretty much a layman in flow cytometry myself.
Okay.
It is a big machine, and you put a sample in it, and it can count, I think, up to like 100,000 cells or something in 5 minutes.
Wow.
So it will count them, sort them, and basically, depending on the fluorescent dyes that you have added to that sample, it'll tell you things about them. So I'm still optimizing my methods, so I have not got any results yet from the current studies, which is the in vitro studies of ginseng, turmeric, and maca powder are the 3 drugs I'm looking at. So their effects on things like reactive oxygen species, so oxidative stress, DNA fragmentation. What else do I look at? Mitochondrial respiration, apoptosis. Yeah, a bunch of different cellular processes and parameters that we can measure. So basically I add a different dye into each. So I've got the sample incubating with the drug. And then I'll take aliquots of that and put different stains into each aliquot, which I can then put into the flow cytometer and press a button, wave a wand at it, do whatever I got to do, and it'll look at all the cells in there basically. Well, not all of them, but a lot more than you could manually look at under a microscope. And and it will tell me, depending on the fluorochromes that it picks up with its detectors, whether that like the amount of reactive oxygen species present, the mitochondrial membrane potential, if the DNA is fragmented or damaged, or if it's intact, if the cells are alive or dead. So those kind of things can be measured in a few minutes, really, which is really handy.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about maca, because I have heard some good things about maca. If I'm not mistaken, it comes from Peru in the mountains.
It does. Okay. Yes. So it's a root vegetable, I guess you'd call it.
All of these are roots. Ginseng too, right? Is root. And
yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure about turmeric though.
That's
turmeric. A good question.
Oh, I know about turmeric is that it's a spice. I haven't really thought.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've never seen it in its real form.
I know. So
it looks like a root too. I'm looking at it now. It looks kind of like a sweet potato.
Oh, there must be something about root vegetables that has a bunch of actions on the body.
Yeah. So I've heard good things about maca, and I actually have also taken it. It's been used.
Does it taste disgusting?
No, as a pill.
Okay.
It was a pill. I wasn't just taking powdered maca. It probably tastes disgusting.
Oh, a lot of people do, especially here.
Really?
They add powdered maca to their smoothies. And as like with a bunch of other supplements and things, and everyone's like, oh, it tastes delicious, it's like a toffee flavor. And then I've opened the one that I have obviously in my lab, and I've smelt it, and I'm like, that is not toffee. Like, I don't know.
Have you ever taken any of these
I think
things?
Someone's paying you to say this. I have not taken them. Obviously I eat turmeric sometimes in meals, but I haven't taken any of these supplements.
You haven't taken it as a supplement, because there's been a lot of I've heard, and actually, maca has been used for kind of mental clarity, and kind of like ginseng. It's very similar to ginseng.
Yeah, it seems to be quite active in a number of different parts of the body, like similar to ginseng, which is why it's obviously everyone's quite interested in researching it. But like ginseng, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of exaggerated claims and those kind of things. So maca is, like you said, it's from Peru, so it's been traditionally used for thousands of years in their traditional medicine. So I think it was first used, from what I remember, they would use it in their bulls for bullfighting and things, and their livestock to like promote fertility and those kind of things. I think especially at high altitudes, you can obviously have altered cellular processes.
I've heard it's good for altitude sickness, and it's interesting to bring that up, because they use it in the Peruvian Andes, I believe.
Yeah, so I think they had a bunch of livestock that were living at high altitudes, and maybe their fertility was not great, so they were like, here, let's feed you some maca. And so obviously anecdotal evidence, but it seemed to work. So now it's quite trendy. A lot of people are interested in it to balance their hormones, which is a phrase I have a big problem with, because that's not really a thing.
What is the proper balance? Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. If your hormones are not balanced, you need to see an endocrinologist, because you probably have a problem. You don't need to take some expensive supplements.
And they fluctuate day to day. So
yeah, exactly. So a lot of people that preach this kind of thing can't really tell you if you're like, okay, so what hormones and why are they unbalanced? They never really have an
I don't
answer.
know. It just sounds cool. Yeah.
Exactly. It sounds scientific and
Uh,
yeah. But yeah, so maca again, very interested in it for fertility. Again, seems to have quite an effect on estrogen receptors. I think testosterone receptors, luteinizing hormone. So quite similar to ginseng, seems to target a lot of aspects of the endocrine system and the reproductive system. Yeah, so there's a lot of interest in maca female reproduction, and there's been a little bit in male reproduction, but again, some of the studies are not great. So obviously more research is definitely needed. So that's another one that I'll be looking at.
Very cool. Well, I'm excited to hear about your results. So we'll definitely have to chat when you're getting closer to finishing. I wanted to, since like ginseng, maca has been used for thousands of years. Now, why is there still today, 2019, we don't have enough studies to find out? We have the anecdotal evidence from these Peruvian tribes and Chinese, medicine men. Mm-hmm. Why haven't we done more studies on this stuff?
Well, that's the thing, kind of similar to ginseng. There have been a lot of studies. They're just not very good.
Yeah.
So they're published in low impact journals. They have a small sample size. It's quite hard to standardize things from plants. So I use a standardized form of ginseng, which I get from a company. It's not just, I don't just go to the health food store and pick some ginseng tablets. Like, I've made sure they're standardized. We've put them through a mass spectrometer to make sure they've got they have what they say they have in them.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's a big problem with herbal medicines is, as I'm sure you know, plants are very different depending on the environment they're grown in, depending on the country they're grown in, depending if they're imported, depending how fresh they are. Just different subtypes of the same plant can be very different, and they can have differing levels of the active ingredients. So the active ingredient in ginseng is called a ginsenoside. So it's a compound. That's the one that everyone's interested in the ginseng. But I think last time I checked, there was 25 subtypes of ginsenosides had been isolated and identified.
Wow.
And I think maybe 150 maybe had been isolated but not identified. So depending on the ratio of those ginsenosides to each other within that plant, how you extract it. So if you extract it in ethanol, if you extract it in methanol, if you boil it in water and extract it, just through boiling, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do things, which is why I think part of the reason why some of the results are so different. So there's so many studies, and some of them are like, yes, it does this, it does this, it does this, it's great. And then there are other studies that say, it doesn't really do anything. The results weren't very good. Seem to be different in males and females, which obviously if it's a reproductive effect, that's probably quite normal and not a bad thing. So that's just one of the problems, is anything coming from a plant, you don't really know what it's going to be like, which is why we obviously prefer to use things like morphine rather than opium poppies, and we prefer to use aspirin rather than acetylsalicylic acid just from a willow bark. If we standardize it and isolate it, and synthesize it ourselves, then we know exactly what we're giving a patient, exactly what the dose is. And when you're using something like a herbal supplement that's still in its herbal form, you can't really control that.
That's an excellent point, and what it made me think of is marijuana. And right now, CBD is a huge thing. And it made me think.
Big thing.
Yeah, but it's very interesting that you said there were 20 different subtypes of this ginsenoside. And isn't it not the same thing in marijuana? You have hundreds of different cannabinoids, and it's the interaction between them, and you can extract some, and they have different effects, but when they're synergistically affect you differently, and so it becomes a very complicated problem.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely not an expert on cannabis, so I'll try and stay in my lane, but I do have quite strong opinions on cannabis. But I do think, obviously, further research into it is always a good thing. I don't know about where you are, but in Australia it's still illegal to use cannabis or have possess cannabis. But we do have it legalized for medicinal cannabis now. But I don't know anyone that takes it. Obviously I know people that take it illegally. I don't know anyone who takes it
medicinally,
have a prescription for it. So it's only where I live in Western Australia, it's only recently been legalized for medicinal use. So I don't know too much about it. I just think a lot of the claims around it that you see on the internet are massively overinflated.
Of course. Yeah, it's marketing.
I actually did a couple of posts on cannabis on Instagram. Each week I do posts on different drugs. It's called Pharmacology Friday. It's just a weekly series I do. Yeah, you have to check it out. And I was in Amsterdam earlier this year in January. So for 3 weeks, the first time I did CBD, or maybe I did THC, then CBD, then just overall, just looking at cannabis overall. So I think it needs a lot more research. I think it has potential for a lot of things, especially things like epilepsy, nausea, and those kind of things.
In epilepsy,
side effects of chemo can apparently help with the side effects, but I think we have a problem when people are throwing around phrases like, "Oh, it cures cancer. Cannabis oil does this. Cannabis oil does this," and I'm like, "Oh." But yeah, I said I was going to stay in my lane because it's not my area of expertise. But yeah, just talked about it for 5 minutes. So yeah, definitely have strong opinions on it. But I'm definitely not an expert in cannabis.
Oh, for sure. But it's
as a pharmacologist, I just say to be careful.
Of course, be careful. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting what you said about ginseng aside, and it made me think of cannabis exactly. And I wonder if other plants like maca and turmeric have the same thing. Are there multiple active, compounds, or
are
all plant medicines similar in that aspect where they have multiple different things and some of them work together?
Yeah, exactly. So you're talking about a whole organism. So they're obviously going to have a bunch of different chemicals, a bunch of different metabolites, a bunch of different things that are going on. And that's, one of the problems if it's not isolated and you're just giving the patient a ginsenoside, if you're giving them an entire ginseng plant, there's a bunch of other things going on. They're all metabolized differently. They all interact with different things. It's just
very interesting.
It can be a problem. It can be, in some ways, it can be a good thing. But obviously, in drug research, we're always looking for selectivity. We want things that are specific for a specific receptor, specific for a receptor subtype. We don't want something that can affect every part of the body because that's not always a good thing.
Yeah, but
and that's one of the things you really need to be careful about with things like ginseng. So like you said, it gives you energy when you take it, and it can also do things to sperm, but it can also do things to like acetylcholine, which is obviously pretty ubiquitous throughout the body, and you don't always want to tamper with that.
Exactly. So you have to be very careful, and I think, like you said, there's a lot more research needs to be done.
I think the way we need to head, as we have with all plant medicines that we've now incorporated into actual drugs, is finding the bits of the plant that are good and making them ourselves in a lab so we know exactly what's in them, exactly the dose, exactly the concentration, and we know it's only going to affect the thing we want it to affect. So specificity is good in drugs. It's not always good to have, the widespread effects that herbs have, unfortunately.
That's a very interesting point, and that's an excellent point. I wanted to talk about something you alluded to earlier about sex differences and these compounds, because especially like you said, with these being fertility-related supplements and herbs, they're going to have huge differences between their effects on males and females. I mean, that's just...
Yeah, definitely. In some ways, definitely. In some ways, not so much. As an aside, I just need to point out that I just think it's hilarious the way different accents pronounce herb versus herb, and I laugh about it all the time.
Herbal.
Every time I'm watching TV, obviously like an American TV show, and they're like, "Oh, we're having some herbal tea," but I just crack up every time.
And you say
But
herbal tea or
I
what?
say herbal, but I don't know if it's actually correct to pronounce the H. I don't actually know, but
What?
oh,
Okay.
I guess
What?
it's not really correct or incorrect. It's just a regional thing. But yeah, it always makes me laugh, so I just had to say that.
That's funny. Herbal. Okay, I'll practice my herbals.
But yeah, pretty much everyone on the internet except me, because most people are obviously based in America, say herbal, and yeah, I just find it hilarious. And there's a website. I don't know if you guys have it. It's called iHerb, but it might be an Australian website, and it's basically a website where you can buy a bunch of herbal supplements and diet things and protein powders and those kind of things. It's kind of I think it's targeted towards like fitness and kind of wellness and health and all that kind of stuff. But it's called iHerb, and then I just imagine people pronouncing it iHerb, and yeah, it just makes me laugh.
It doesn't work as well because there's two vowels, but yeah.
It must be an Australian site.
That's
So
funny.
sorry, back to your question.
Yes, tell me.
Yeah, so obviously some of the effects can be quite different, but there's a lot of evidence of maca acting on estrogen receptors, so kind of imitating estrogen, I guess, is the way to
It's kind
put
of
it.
like a synthetic estrogen
Yeah, or like so phytoestrogens are
or a phyto, like a
found in
soybeans or
plants.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So quite similar. So soybean is a big one that has a bit of a bad rap, but maybe it's villainized a bit more than it should be. There's not very compelling evidence that it's bad for women to eat it or anything. But again, it depends. Depends how much you have. Depends on a lot of other things. There is some evidence that I read recently that if you drink soy milk and you take thyroxine, so if you've got thyroid disease, it can reduce absorption of thyroxine, which is not ideal.
That could be dangerous, yeah.
Yeah, as someone who has thyroid disease, I can say you don't want to mess with your thyroxine getting absorbed. So yeah, that's just a bit of a pro tip. You might want to look into that. Anyone who takes things or takes any medications, that they also drink soy milk in their coffee or anything at a similar time, whether that's having any kind of effect. But yeah, so it's like similar to soy, maca appears to act on estrogen receptors, but that is quite a big thing in males and females, because estrogen is also very important in male reproduction and male fertility.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
so they might have the same mechanism of actions, but the hormones themselves affect the males and females differently, or?
So estrogen is obviously paramount to female reproduction, but it's also very important in male reproduction. So there's evidence that aromatase, which is an enzyme that converts androgens into estrogens, and in females, or maybe in both. I think it's in both, because estrogens come from androgens. Hormones are very complicated.
Yes.
And if you inhibit this enzyme in males, or if any males, so I remember a study that I looked at was they just blocked the enzyme in a mouse model, in male mice, and so they couldn't produce any estrogen because they were blocking its conversion from androgens, and those males had a reduction in their sperm count, the motility of their sperm, so the sperm can't really swim, so obviously that's not ideal. So if you're blocking the enzyme that's responsible for producing estrogen, it has downstream effects on male reproduction. So if you are adding a drug, say maca, that influences estrogen in any way, that could be either beneficial or not beneficial, depending on the circumstances, in males as well. So obviously people think a lot about estrogen in terms of female reproduction, but they don't really think of it when it comes to males.
No, that's interesting. Now, let's say Are there any herbal supplements
No, you say herbal. It's fine.
that are proven to work for males or females and to improve their fertility? I guess I'm asking if there's any proven methods of improving fertility in both females and males.
It is a tough one because it's dependent on so many factors. It depends if you are infertile because you have a medical condition, if you're infertile because you don't have a very good diet, if you're infertile because of genetic things and things like that. I wouldn't say prove. I think that's a very strong word that we should avoid where possible.
Okay.
There's, like I said, there's some evidence that ginseng maca can influence these things, but if you smoke, if you drink a lot, if you have a bad diet and you think that you can supplement with something like ginseng and that'll reverse all the damage you're doing, that's obviously not a good way of thinking, and that's probably not going to be very effective. It
So
really
diet,
depends. It's like a
diet
big
is
issue.
huge, and smoking is what you're saying. You have to have a healthy diet, smoking, alcohol, cut all that out if you're trying to reproduce.
Yeah, so none of my sheep do that, so they're good. They're good for my study.
That's very nice of them.
Yeah, they're very well behaved. So that's another thing I'm quite interested in is oxidative stress, which is a big thing in male infertility. So while I'm also looking at the effects of these herbal compounds on things like oxidative stress to see, like, are they effective? Are they not? Are they doing any damage? Are they toxic? Are they killing the sperm? Are they protecting it? I'm also interested just in oxidative stress as a standalone as well. And that is a big thing in infertility. So for anyone that doesn't know, oxidative stress basically happens when there's an imbalance between oxidants and antioxidants. So oxidants are things like free radicals. So they're very unstable oxygen. So you can get oxygen and nitrogen species that are unstable. So from what I understand from doing and forgetting all my undergraduate chemistry,
it happens.
A reactive oxygen species is a molecule that has an unpaired electron, and that makes it unstable. And so obviously these are not, they're not ideal in large amounts, but they are crucial to cellular processes. So obviously antioxidants are a bit of a buzzword at the moment. Everyone wants to take antioxidant supplements. Things like maca, ginseng have antioxidant properties, so that's why people are quite interested in them. But if we go too far in that direction, we're just tipping the scales that way, and we don't have enough oxygen species and we've got too many antioxidants, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so it's all about balance in that respect. But things like, or just general cellular processes, we are generating reactive oxygen species all the time. So as we sit here speaking, we're doing it. It's part of metabolism. It's quite normal. Obviously, normal cellular metabolism is where even glucose metabolism, those kind of things, we're generating oxygen, and that oxygen has to go somewhere, and it's very unstable. So then we have antioxidants in place, like an antioxidant system, to then kind of neutralize that, I guess, for lack of a better term. To balance that out, so not as many unstable molecules running about the cell. But things like smoking, obviously drinking, eating a diet that's high in fat, and I don't want to say eating bad food versus good food, because I think that
people are like, what are bad foods? What are good foods? Yeah.
Well, we already have this whole
this is a huge debate in the world.
Fear of eating bad foods, and I don't want to I don't want to add to that, but think basically treat foods that you should be eating sometimes. If you're eating too many, if you have bad diet, too many fried foods, those kind of things can contribute to oxidative stress, and oxidative stress can lead to a bunch of things, infertility being a main one in males, but also things like cancer, um, what else, like autoimmune diseases. There's kind of some research into it causing things like Alzheimer's and those kind of things. But yeah, it's just not something that we want. But in sperm, it causes things like DNA fragmentation. Well, I guess it does in all cells, but in particular in sperm, this is one of the things I'm looking at. So yeah, so DNA fragmentation pretty much leads to infertility. The sperm they're either not really fertile, they're not going to fertilize an egg, or if they do, there's going to be a lot of mutations, a lot of genetic damage, and a lot of things in the baby, I guess, if it even makes it that far. So there's a lot of carry-on effects of oxidative damage in sperm cells.
Mm-hmm. So when you're trying to have a baby, it's good to live almost a perfect lifestyle to maximize the probabilities of passing on, perfect genes, or as the best genes you can.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can't go. You need to live your life. You can't.
But control the things you can, right?
Yeah, exactly. Control the things you can. Try and be healthy most of the time. Don't go overboard. Yeah, don't go too far in either direction. But all of these things are very important to fertility. And so one of the things I'm looking at, so when I finally finish optimizing my methods, is one of the things I'm going to do is induce oxidative damage in the sperm myself, and then see if turmeric or maca or ginseng has any kind of protective effect against that, compared
very interesting.
Compared to a control. Yeah, so quite interesting. A lot of data will be generated, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear your results. I had one last question for you about the future. Do you think that, are there any exciting new herbs or ancient medicines that you're interested in looking into in the future? Or are you focused on maca, turmeric, and ginseng?
I don't know. I'm quite interested in all of it. And I think one of the problems that we have, and one of the things that kind of makes herbal medicine so polarizing, is we have the camp where it's useless, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't work, that kind of thing. And then the camp of, it's amazing and I take it, and it works for me, therefore it works for everyone. And the kind of, if there's the difference between having no evidence for something, or evidence to disprove something, versus not having enough evidence to prove something. I worded that terribly. So something like homeopathy, we all know is bullshit, and we don't need to study homeopathy anymore. We know that it doesn't work. We know that it defies every law of the universe. Obviously, there's always some people who are like, but it worked for me. It probably didn't.
We might get some backlash on that, but that's okay.
Yeah. So this is a science podcast, so we can talk about homeopathy not working, hopefully. But yeah, so something like homeopathy, we've done the studies. We don't need to waste any more money figuring out whether or not it works. We know it doesn't. The case is closed. Something like ginseng, like I said, there's hundreds of studies out there. Half of them say one thing, half of them say the other. Mm-hmm. So we don't really have much conclusive, compelling evidence. So we need to kind of figure out which bits work, which bits don't. And I think there's always room to improve that. Same as things like vitamins and supplements. There's always room for more research into why they don't work, why they do work, what's actually going on. So I read a study the other day of basically, obviously we know that vitamin supplementation is not really necessary unless you're deficient. That's pretty old news by now, but we can always have further research into why getting it from food is different to getting it from a pill. So I was reading a study a couple of days ago where so some people just say vitamin C. Obviously vitamin C is very important, and if you're getting it from things like fruit, it's very effective, versus the patients who were getting it a synthetic form from a vitamin pill, basically, and it just was not having the same effect. And we don't know if the body's just metabolizing it differently, if it's just not being absorbed in that in that form or anything like that. So in that case, I think there's always more research to be done, but there is a point where we need to stop funding things where we know that they don't work. We don't really need to keep investigating. We can move on to something else that might be more effective. So I don't think we're quite at that stage yet with ginseng and maca and all those kind of things, but there will come a point where hopefully we'll be like, yes, we've figured out that they're definitely useful for this, they're not useful for this, and these are the people that should take it, and this is the form that they should take it in. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think what you were talking about with the vitamins, it sounds a lot like ginseng. You know, there's probably different enzymes that are in the fruit that help you digest it, and they're paired with different vitamins that increase absorption. So it's just a whole network that you can't just take one thing out of the network and expect to have the same effect of the network, right?
Yeah. So like I said, with selectivity of drugs, you want to isolate that one compound to act on one receptor. But in the case of vitamins, we need them all over our body. We need them in all our cells. So we don't really want to isolate it when in its natural form. It might have, like you said, a bunch of enzymes that help you absorb it and those kind of things. To get to a controversial area, and it just amazes me, some of the people, obviously you have social media, you know all about it, you don't read the comment section of anything, but when there's a study on herbal medicines or a study on vitamins saying that they're bad or they're not doing anything or they're inconclusive, there's always all this backlash from people saying, oh, like it's just big pharma doesn't want you to take these because they want to make money off you, and they're not going to make money off you if you're taking herbs. The herbal supplement industry, I think, is worth I don't know off the top of my head, but billions of dollars. It's $1 billion industry, and I'm like, well, what do you think they're doing with your money? Like, it's a business. There's big pharma and there's big herb, or whatever you want to call it.
Herba, yeah.
Big herba is also interested in your money.
Exactly.
Well,
I'm definitely excited to talk to you in the coming years, because having taken ginseng and maca personally and feeling effects, more cognitive.
Good, I'm glad they're doing
that I
something.
I want to hear about what kind of conclusions you come to.
Yeah, my PhD supervisor also takes maca and ginseng.
You should try it. I mean, just try it for a couple of days and see how you feel.
Yeah, I just can't get past the smell of maca. And the ones I get, it's a standardized form and it's in a capsule.
Which is the best one to take, probably, yeah.
Yeah, but once I break open the capsule to extract, because I need to extract them once I get them, and yeah, I just can't get past the smell. But
it's okay.
I do have a lot of
yogurt.
capsules sitting there, so I'll put it in a smoothie like everyone else. But you can get it in the supermarket. There's a little aisle in our supermarkets. I don't know if you guys are the same. It's just basically a little health aisle, and there's maca, there's ginseng, there's cacao, there's turmeric.
We have
and
the
it's
same
really
thing.
funny because the turmeric, get a little sachet of it, and it's about $20 for this little sachet of turmeric. And then if you go into the spice aisle where there's like turmeric, curry powder, and all this kind of things, it's like $2 for the same size or a bigger packet. So I'm like, I wonder if they realize that this is the exact same thing as the other turmeric down the other end of the store that's just not got all the buzzwords on it. But
exactly, just buy the spice. So if anyone's looking to buy turmeric, just buy it in spice form and you're going to save a lot of money.
Buy the normal thing. Although having said that, so curcumin is the active ingredient of turmeric that we're interested in. That's the one that seems to have a lot of biological activity. So anytime you read studies on turmeric, which there's a lot of them around at the moment, they're looking at curcumin. And so I ordered curcumin from Sigma Aldrich. I don't know if you guys have the same company. It's a big chemical company that you get research stuff from. Just where we get all our chemicals and things. And so I paid, they sent me this big thing of curcumin. So it's isolated curcumin. So I knew exactly what was in it. It was standardized. I knew, because obviously I need the molecular weight and all those kind of things of that compound so I can calculate my doses and things. So I didn't want to just go and buy some turmeric. So they sent me
from
curcumin.
Whole Foods,
And for some reason I was expecting curcumin because it's isolated, to just be a white powder or like a clear liquid or something, but it's actually bright orange.
Exactly
So,
the same.
and I open it. I'm like, oh my God, did I just pay $100 and they just sent me turmeric? But I think now that I think about it, I think curcumin must be what gives turmeric its color. Um, yeah, I'm hoping they didn't rip me off and just send me some turmeric instead of isolated curcumin.
You
But
have to complain.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Well, thanks for coming on today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I've learned
Thank
a
you.
lot about these herbal medicines, and I'm looking forward to
Good.
talking to you in the next 1 year or so.
Yeah, I'll definitely update you when I have some results, especially if there's any interesting results. Um, yeah,
So if people want to
you'll be the first
follow,
to know.
if people want to follow you and see what you do, where can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram, so I do quite a bit of science communication through my Instagram, which is Taylor Catherine. Um, Taylor is spelt with an E, which is why everyone gets very confused about how to pronounce it and if I'm a girl or a boy. So yeah, just I guess you can pop that in the show notes.
Yeah,
So
we'll
that's
put
my
it in the
Instagram
show notes.
handle.
Okay.
Yeah, so I do Pharmacology Friday every week and Toxicology Tuesday every week. And then monthly I do series. And then, yeah, anything that kind of pops up that I feel like I should talk about, whether it be herbal medicines or those kind of things. I usually, yeah, talk about those on Instagram as well.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.